Welcome back to Metflex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and I'm here with my friend, Christina Rice. What's up, Christina?
Hey, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here. I can't wait to talk about all the things today.
We have so much to talk about.
I know. It was hard for me to think of what specific topics I want to talk about because I feel like we just when we're together, we'll just talk for hours. So yeah, but let's get into it because we have so much. But before we get started, why don't you just give our listeners just a little background of who you are, where you're coming from, and yeah, the whole shebang.
Yeah, so my name is Christina Rice, and I am a content creator. I've been writing a health and wellness blog and hosting a wellness podcast called Wellness Realness for the last 4 to 5 years. And I'm also trained as a nutritional therapy practitioner and a primal health coach and a Reiki practitioner. And now I'm focusing on holistic business coaching to help other nutritionists and health coaches build their businesses using social media, because that's what I did. And I got into all of this through my own health journey. So it's a very long, complicated story, right? But the couple minute version is that I grew up with really bad digestive issues. I had clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder, really bad acne. And it wasn't until college, after a bout of chronic mono for 1.5 years, that I started to realize I needed to turn things around. I fell into binge eating disorder because I was so depressed. And to get out of that, I said, hey, I need to turn this around. I'm going to start getting healthy for the first time in my life after eating the standard American diet for my whole life and never exercising. And so I started diving into health and wellness and reading blogs and websites and magazines and books and all the things I could find. And on that journey, wanting to really fix my gut issues, and because I didn't realize that they were abnormal. I had chronic constipation. I was so bloated all the time. It was bad. So I set out on a journey to get to the root of that, and it was seeing a lot of doctors, doctor after doctor. I was in Los Angeles and seeing the best specialists, seeing different nutritionists. I became convinced that food was connected to it. And I got triggered with what I now know to be a parasitic infection, and my digestion kind of just stopped working. So with that, combined with really bad leaky gut, I lost about 50 pounds in 2 to 3 months. And
Wow.
the doctors at the time couldn't figure out what was going on. And I had to drop out of school. I was told I could basically die anytime because my organs were shutting down. And that really fueled me to say, hey, I felt so unsupported. I need to turn this around myself. So that's when I really dove into the research and learned to be my own health advocate. Found a paleo ketogenic diet, used that plus proper supplementation to start healing my gut and putting on healthy weight again. And after I reached a healthier weight where I could go back to school and kind of live my life normally, I found functional medicine. And over the last couple of years, it was just kind of picking up the pieces from that and figuring out what really happened. And I kept getting gut issues over and over again. And it was SIBO, Candida, 3 parasites, different genetic mutations at play. And then I found out that I had, heavy metals toxicity, mold illness, and then ended up going on a Lyme protocol last year. And, through that, I tried so many different diets. I've seen so many different types of practitioners, been on so many supplements. I feel like I'm the protocol queen at this point, but that inspired me to want to work with other people and help them heal at the root cause and, just empower people to take their health into their own hands. And so it's been a journey, but I'm happy for it. And yeah, that's what led me to do what I do.
That's awesome. Sorry, that's amazing. Yeah, I definitely want to dive into your kind of different experiments because I know we're pretty similar in the approach where we just like to try a lot of different things. And I think that that's part of, where our passion comes from and how we can actually help people is because we go through these things yourself. It's not something that just happens overnight. We've been going through it for years. I've been, I started dabbling with keto almost 5 years ago. And it's the experiences that I've learned throughout, those last 5 years is what shaped me into being able to help other people. And so I think that's like a huge piece of it. It's like with because I know you're getting into more business with entrepreneurs and things like that. And it's like, we have to realize that these things don't happen overnight. And it's like, you go on your own journey and like, you're constantly learning. And that's something that definitely, like for me, just every single day is like something new I'm learning. And it really gave me kind of the approach to look back and say like, okay, I can't be dogmatic about my views because it's always changing. And like, we're always changing as humans and as we develop, and things are not always like what worked for even me or you like a year ago probably isn't working right now, or things like that. So just diving into like the experiments and stuff, because that's something that I love to do, always experimenting. Are there any, like, maybe we can just chat about maybe your most recent, like within the last year or two, some of the experiments that you've done in terms of like playing around with different diet protocols and macros and stuff like that?
Yeah. So in the last year, I've mostly been in the last 5 years paleo keto. And in the last year, I wanted to try eating higher carb. I'm always paleo, but so I went for a while doing a higher carb, high protein, lower fat approach with a trainer. And I did that for maybe 5 or 6 months. And then I ended up having a lot of reactions to food. So then started going back to a ketogenic approach. And I was trying to do low histamine AIP keto for a bit and for like a week. And I thought, this isn't working. So I ended up doing a 3-day fast and then hopping back into carnivore. And then I've been mostly carnivore for the last about 5 months now. But my first 1 to 2 months, it was super strict. And then since then, I say it's carnivore-ish. I'm 95% carnivore, so mainly meat-based. And I feel my best this way than I have in a long time. So those are kind of some of the main things I've tried in the last year. And I mean, right before I did the high carb, low fat, high protein experiment, which was so new to me and really good for me for pushing myself out of my comfort zone, I did the potato diet.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of people come on my podcast who talk about these different diets, and I like to try everything. Like, I feel like I've tried almost every different type of diet out there. Oh, I also tried raw vegan for like a week this year, which, that didn't go well. So I tried that too. And because I think it's really important to push yourself outside of your comfort zone and try everything, because you don't know what's going to work best for your body. And to your point, what you were talking about earlier, when I look back at my journey, the first 1 or 2 years when I got into this space, I was so dogmatic and I thought everybody needed to be on a like low carb paleo diet. And I'm like, this will solve everyone's problems. And I was just being immature and naive. And now, after working with so many people and experiencing changes in my own life and my own body, I thought, hey, I need to take a moment to humble myself and try out everything before I talk about it. And realizing that for different people, different diets are going to serve them at different times in their lives. And there really is no one size fits all approach. And so I think it's really helpful for me to try things that I assume are going to make me feel awful, that maybe I felt great on, like potato diet. I thought, I don't know how this is going to go, right? Because for much of my life, I was so carbohydrate intolerant. I mean, I would faint after having 2 bites of sweet potatoes. I was reacting to every type of carbohydrate. And so for me to eat only potatoes for 2 weeks, and I felt actually really good.
Yeah, like tell us a little bit about that. I'm just curious because I've never done
Yeah.
like, was it literally just potatoes for 2 weeks?
Yeah, literally just potatoes. So like I said, I did this because someone came on my podcast about the potato diet and I thought I should try this. So, and I had tried carnivore for 2 weeks, about a year before that. And so I'm like, I need to try both sides of the spectrum. So traditionally you need to eat regular potatoes, but I react really badly to potatoes. I always have, because of the nightshades and my autoimmunity. And so I ate mostly sweet potatoes, which technically aren't potatoes, but I talked to the creator of the diet and he said that was okay.
Wait, why are sweet potatoes technically not potatoes?
If you just if you look at the
Because they're like
origin of,
yams, or
they're just a different species.
oh.
People think that they're not potatoes, because I mean, if they were potatoes, then if someone who reacts to nightshades wouldn't be able to have sweet
Yeah.
potatoes, right?
I never thought
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
why do we call it sweet potatoes? Because they look
I
like a
don't know.
potato and they're sweet.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know that they weren't potatoes until I started doing this. But
Yeah. I
you
didn't
know,
know until 5 seconds ago.
it's logistics. But yeah, you can't have any oil or salt. It's literally just potatoes. And a big part of why I liked it was for the same reasons why I like carnivore. It's so simple. You don't have to think about what you're buying or cooking. Cooking doesn't take that long. And I mean, I enjoyed it. I also hadn't had that many sweet potatoes in so long, so it was really fun. But after about 2 weeks, I was really sick of the taste.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just felt a little off. But overall, I mean, it was interesting because when I first started it, the first couple of days, I felt like I was back in ketosis. And
Really?
yeah,
Sorry. I'm just like,
I,
what?
I felt the same way. I had been out of keto for a bit, and I know how I feel. And I didn't have any ketone strips, so I didn't test. But I started diving into research about low-fat diets, and there's some really interesting research that's kind of been hidden. Like, I literally paid to get into the archives of Duke University to find some of these studies. But there's some people have hypothesized that the quote problematic zone is when you are at above between 10% and 70% in terms of fat. Like, that's your fat ratio, where they're saying, like, you get these, let's say you get these ketogenic benefits when you're above 70% fat, which, I mean, you can get them at slightly lower than that, but let's say that range. But they're saying that all of these, when you are below 10% fat, something different happens. And I forget who said this, but someone referred to it as carbosis. Like, something weird happens metabolically, because there are all these studies of people like healing their metabolic syndrome and like regulating their blood pressure and getting all these health benefits from eating a basically no fat diet. And so a lot of the people who are diving into this research were saying the issues start when you are looking at like 20% fat, like that style of low fat diet, but that something strange happens when you're at below 10%. And then they're like basically saying there's two sides of the spectrums, where when you're in that quote carbosis, you're eating, mostly carbohydrates and less than 10% fat, you can start to feel like you're in ketosis. So that was
That's so
super
weird.
interesting to me, and also to experience. That was very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because I felt really good. And then I started kind of toying with that, and I noticed, if I add a little bit of fat, I don't feel good. And I think, well, no, I mean, I think we know, like, what's the problem? The problem is when you pair carbohydrates and fat, it's not necessarily one or the other. Like, if you want to eat a high carb diet, eat a low fat diet, it's the problem is when they're together. So
yeah. So sorry, my voice is not great today. So I have two questions. So I would be like, the reason why I would be like super worried about that and probably wouldn't try it myself is just like, where does the protein come from? Right?
yeah.
Like, so did you, like, when you were doing that, obviously you were just eating potatoes. So there's like, you literally had like no protein, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I personally would never eat that way long term.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is a problem with it. I wouldn't say like you should eat a low fat, super high carb diet. Yeah. Cause I'm a big protein person. I'm like team high protein, like more than most people.
Yeah.
So that is a long-term problem, but a lot of, if you look at just the science, you're looking at like that particular situation where, I mean, there are so many studies where people were put on this super high carb, low fat, like below 10%, and they were getting benefits, but that's short term.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. Cause do you think, I mean, this podcast, we talk all about like metabolic flexibility. And do you think that kind of introducing that kind of shock to your body was probably like the main cause of why the benefits were coming? Cause I would assume like if someone was, because we know like with being in ketosis long term and following a high fat diet, that your fuel source is, ketones. Like that's where you get most of your fuel source. And that is what is, so beneficial. Whereas if you were doing like a high carb diet, I mean, minus the part where you're saying you could potentially get into ketosis with this, with the very, very high carb, but there's no, like, I feel like I don't know. It's just like my mind is blown a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's not actually ketosis. That's why
Yeah.
like the people who are writing about this and studying it, like weren't really reaching conclusions, but they're saying that's why they're calling it carbosis, because like something similar to ketosis is happening. That's how you feel. You're feeling
Yeah.
similarly, but I mean, no, I mean, I don't think long term that's beneficial, and I don't think for me the way I was feeling was because of the shock to the body, because I've switched my diet so many times and it usually doesn't give me a beneficial shock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I think someone whose body isn't as sensitive, who isn't like, doesn't have autoimmune diseases, yeah, shocking the body is super helpful
Mm-hmm.
and switching it up in that way. But I mean, I mean, and I wrote about this in my blog because I was kind of just like
Yeah.
talking about the research. And I mean, long term, there's nothing about hormonal health. You know, when you're that low fat diet, I don't think that's optimal.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting. And the point was really, you know, for someone who leans more towards keto, carnivore, low carb, I think it's really good to force yourself to look at the other side of the equation and not just knock everyone down and say you're
Mm-hmm.
wrong. We really need to look at both sides. And I think it's good to experience both sides.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's kind of like what I've learned over the years and why I'm so passionate about this whole concept of metabolic flexibility, because it's like, I mean, most Americans are not metabolically flexible. And I think that that's where a lot of the root diseases are coming from, is because so many people are so metabolically inflexible and they don't, experience these different, protocols and things like that. And so that's why I just think that it's something like, even with keto, it's like, I think keto is super, there's so many benefits to keto. But there are also like long-term things that probably aren't as beneficial to your average person who's not looking to like treat a disease or something like that. So I think it's that whole, it all comes back to the whole dogmatic like mentality and kind of getting past that and realizing that, what works for one person might not work for another. What works for you now may not be working for you in 6 months from now. And it's like all experimenting and trying different things. I'm not sure if I would try the potato diet. I'd also just be concerned. This is another question I was going to ask, like blood sugar regulation. So like with that, did you test or regulate your blood sugar at all throughout the 2 weeks?
Yeah, I did test my blood sugar and it was totally normal.
Really?
And yeah, and so that was one of the other interesting things, like these studies, these are is back in like the 40s and 50s. People were regulating their blood sugar, like reversing diabetes with this type of diet, which is bizarre.
So weird. Yeah.
And it was just one of these things where there are these studies and like they just kind of got pushed aside and no one's really looking into them. I don't have any conclusions and I'm also not a scientist, right? But I just think it's interesting to bring it up. And especially if someone is so diehard low carb keto, like there's information out there that goes the opposite way, so it's just good to evaluate the whole situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I also, talking about metabolic flexibility, it's so important to me because being low carb for so long gave me some issues. And like I was talking about before, I became really carbohydrate intolerant.
Mm-hmm.
And after experiencing that and, eating low carb for so long and then wanting to throw a carbohydrate in here and there when I would have such bad reactions, after experiencing that, I just thought, I don't want this to happen to me. Like, I don't like it, right? I want to be able to throw in a sweet potato and not faint or like, feel awful. And so that's why like metabolic flexibility became really important to me. And I also struggled with really disrupted leptin signaling after being low carb for so long. And it turned into this chronic hunger. No matter how much I ate, I was so hungry after a few years. At first, I was super satiated by protein and fat. And then after a few years, no matter how much I ate, I mean, I could eat 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories of protein and fat, and I was still hungry. And as soon as I added in carbohydrates, I started to feel full.
Can you talk
with
about,
way less food. Yeah.
sorry, can you talk
Yeah.
about leptin, like what it is, just in case anybody doesn't understand what exactly leptin is and, how those levels can change over time, especially with following a very, very low carb keto diet.
Yeah. So when we look at hunger and satiety. Leptin is our satiety hormone. Ghrelin is our hungry hormone.
Mhm.
I always think of it like ghrelin growling.
Yeah,
Like your
me
stomach
too.
growling. Yeah. So leptin is your satiety hormone. So if you're having issues with your leptin, then you can just feel hungry all the time. You won't feel satiated.
Mhm.
And I think this is also more of an issue for women than men, because women have leptin receptors on the thyroid in their ovaries. So women have a lot more they're a lot more leptin sensitive than
Mhm.
men. And when our leptin is chronically low and it's not getting stimulated by carbohydrates, then that can cause chronic hunger. It can also lead to anxiety and sleep issues
Mhm.
as well. And so I was experiencing that chronic hunger.
Yeah.
My leptin was never getting spiked
Yeah.
by the carbohydrate. And it was really interesting to me. For me, I had to hit this magical number. Once I spent maybe a week eating 125 to 150 grams of whole food carbohydrate, that totally reset my leptin.
Mhm.
And now I know I have to cycle that in to maintain that. But I think that's something that not as many people talk about as being a potential issue, eating strictly keto, low carb for a long period of time, especially when you're a woman.
Yeah, it's just like literally everything you're saying is actually one of the core lessons that I teach in my keto form program, because I experienced that as well. And when I started to experiment with carb ups and introducing, like starting with a targeted approach around my workouts, and then I started introducing like a more of a cyclical approach, like things started changing and I started getting the results that I wanted. I started feeling better, and it was all just like being educated on this. And that's like literally we go into in depth on leptin and how it can be different, especially for women, like everything you said. And I think a huge like piece of the puzzle that's missing out there for women who are doing keto is like they're just not educated on this, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I was too. Like I just wasn't, like until I learned this, I didn't understand it and I didn't know how to implement it myself. And once I did, it all comes back to like going through that journey and like experiencing it yourself. And then when I experienced it myself, and then I started working, testing out with my clients, and they started seeing results, and I was like, okay, like this starts to make sense. And so it all comes back to like just always educating yourself. And so that's like it's just funny because literally everything you said is what, like, we spend a whole week talking about that in the keto firm program. And really the program is to just teach you how to become more metabolically flexible. And one of the ways to do that is to incorporate carbs strategically, using them as a tool. For me personally, I feel like no matter what, over the past like 5-6 years, I've always felt better with my like home base being low carb.
Mm-hmm.
Like low carb keto is like my home base. And then veering off from that and trying different experiments and doing different things. And then, recently over the past year, just incorporating carb ups now and then. Well, actually more on a regular basis, especially with like performance and things like that. It's just like a completely different ball game. And I think that with women who have gone keto and they've gotten the results initially and they felt amazing, and then usually, and this is where my clientele comes from, usually it's those women who have gone keto, they got really great results, whether it was, fat loss, weight loss, hormone changes, or things like that. And then it's like they hit this plateau, like after, a year or 6 months or whatever. And then it's like, you don't know where to go from there. And I think a lot of it stems from you feel so good in the beginning. And you're like, wow, like I'm never going back to carbs. And you start to develop carb phobia, right? And this is something I went through. Did you ever experience carb phobia, and like how did you kind of fix that, or not fix it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I experienced it at two different times. The first was, when I first changed my diet, I went from standard American diet to low carb keto, and my life changed. My world changed, and a lot of my horrible symptoms I've been dealing with my whole life went away. And I just immediately became afraid of carbohydrates because I thought those are what are making me constipated. They're giving me anxiety. They're making me depressed. They're like making me so bloated. So I became really afraid of them. And then I got kind of pushed by a nutritionist to add them in. And I was so carbohydrate intolerant, and made me even more afraid of them because I would literally faint every time I had a carb.
Because your blood sugar was probably
Yeah.
going, yeah.
Yeah. It was so dysregulated. So I had to get over that by just slowly adding them in. And at that time, it was kind of forced upon me by the practitioners I was working with. This was when I was 20. And then I did my thing. I was eating carbs more regularly, and then I had gut issues again, and I had to go low carb again and like kind of cut out all the starches. And I think just being on a low carb diet for a couple of years and starting to read everything in the media and hear everything about keto and carbs, and you start to get brainwashed by the
Oh
people
my
in the keto
gosh.
space, right? Like they're so convincing. Everyone is so convincing
Yeah.
and basically saying that carbs are the devil. And when you're hearing that all the time, you start to kind of think that. And so I definitely became afraid of carbohydrates again.
Mm.
And I knew that. And so I'm just the kind of person when something scares me, I'm like, okay, this means I literally have to do it. So that's kind of what launched me into, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start eating carbs every meal to prove to myself I can survive. And I was fine. And so that's kind of how I got out of it. I just forced myself to eat some carbohydrates and realize, hey, you're going to be totally fine.
Yeah.
Chilling.
Yeah. And you could, like, once you started to incorporate carbs again, because you were so, low carb keto for that period of time, like your body, and this is kind of what I try to explain to people. It's like your body understands how to kind of use fat more efficiently and ketones
Mm-hmm.
more efficiently for fuel. And so it's not necessarily that you have to be in ketosis 24/7 to still get the benefits of metabolic flexibility. But I feel like there is still, a period of time that you have to go through that adaptation and
Yeah.
teach your body, like, okay, what are these ketones? Because most of America, most of the society, like our society has never been in ketosis. So it's like they don't, like their body just doesn't know how to use fat and ketones for fuel. Um, but yeah, I mean, I definitely experienced similar carb phobia. And I think that's one of the biggest issues like today,
Yeah.
with keto and all of that. And I definitely was one of the people that like, a few years ago, I was like, keto everything. And it just, like, I still think it's super beneficial. And I feel like I always use low carb as my home base, but
Mm-hmm.
being dogmatic about that and just like it's not okay.
Yeah. Well, I think a big part of the conversation that's left out is our relationship with food and our stress levels around food. And there are situations when people really do need to be very strict keto and don't incorporate a carbohydrate, right? But I think people know, am I afraid of a carbohydrate? Like, come on. If you're afraid of that, we need to be honest with ourselves and kind of show ourselves, hey, I'm going to be okay if I have this. And I really think it's important, if you're afraid of them, to incorporate them back in. And then if you genuinely just feel better being lower carb, then at least you're making that decision not out of fear, but out of, hey, I love my body and I want it to feel good. And I think there are ways to kind of ease into it. So if you're trying to add carbs back in, go slowly. Make it a whole food carbohydrate, time it around your workouts so you feel like it's getting put to use.
Mhm.
There are ways to lean into it. You don't have to do what I did and eat it every single day, but just start incorporating it in your routine. But I just think that, especially for women, I mean, actually, let me take that back. I think there are a lot of men in the keto space who have some disordered relationships with food, who cover that up by just saying, well, it's keto, it's healthier. This is what I do. I'm going to fast for 5 days because it makes me feel good. Okay, sometimes, right? Like fasting is so beneficial certain times for certain people, certain situations, but I think, there's there's a very tricky line that people cross. And I think men and women alike, there can be a time where the way you eat, if that affects your stress levels, if you're just like thinking about the way you're eating all the time, if you are afraid of certain foods, if you're making your choices out of fear, then that's something to look at and reevaluate.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think, coming back to the fasting point, that's definitely something that's another, carb phobia is one of the things that's surfacing. And then just fasting, especially for women, I feel like it's like, for me in particular, like I went down what I call the fasting rabbit hole. And, I started fasting, felt good. And I was like, okay, well, I feel good. And I started doing it more and I felt even better. And then you get to the point where it's like, oh, wait, too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. And I think that for women especially, it's a little bit different as well. Not a little bit, but a lot different than men, because women aren't small men. Like, we have hormonal processes and other things that men don't have. And so our hormones are a little bit more sensitive to things like fasting. And like you said, fasting is, it's very, very powerful and it's a good stressor to the body, but too much stress is not good. Just like, too much exercise is not good and all of that. So can you speak a little bit to why fasting chronically could, hinder specifically women and, kind of like hormonal responses and things like that?
Yeah, so I think the two hormones to look at are the cortisol and the estrogen. So, okay, just in general, like we are more sensitive to stressors. We women, I'm sure there are men listening to this. We are designed to reproduce and have children, right? And even if you don't want to have children, that's fine, but that's what your body is designed to do. And so if anything is threatening that ability, if your body thinks, oh, I don't have enough energy, resources, fuel to support having a child, then that sets off danger zone in the body, danger, like I'm not safe. And so this is, I think, a big reason why, that's affecting your cortisol essentially. And I think for women, it's super helpful to get some food in first thing in the morning so their brains know, hey, I have fuel. And I see so many women get on this fasting train, and for some people it works great, but for a lot of women, after some time their hair is falling out, their periods are all dysregulated, they're tired, they're fatigued, they're gaining weight, and a simple change like adding in breakfast can reverse all those issues. And I think especially getting some protein in first thing, and this also ties back into like leptin signaling. And even if someone's afraid to do that, even just flipping your fasting window so that you're like skipping dinner rather than breakfast tends to work a lot better for women. Although I know it's not always the easiest socially, but I just think that in terms of, cortisol, our bodies want to know we're safe. And for a lot of women, they feel better when they have some protein and fat in the morning just to tell their brains, hey, I'm good. And then the other issue is just with the estrogen, and I don't even know the science behind this, but a bunch of different studies have suggested that keto tends to work better in bodies with lower levels of estrogen, which is why, keto seems to be really easy for a lot of guys. A lot of guys can, I talk to guys all the time where like, yeah, I forgot to eat today. So they just have a big dinner and they feel fine. Their bodies are kind of designed to, quote, go out and hunt and then come back at night and feast. We're not designed for that. We're designed to kind of, stay back, gather, and have babies. So I think those are the two hormones I really think of and how there are differences with men and women. And look, for some women, they do really well with fasting. I have found that when I wasn't carnivore, fasting made me feel awful. But now that I'm carnivore, some more fasting makes me feel a lot better. And I don't really fast totally. I have collagen and some fat in my coffee in the morning, but
like a fat fast type thing.
Yeah. So that tends to be easier on my body. But I think if you're a woman and you've reached a plateau or you're getting strange hormonal issues, you're breaking out, your hair is falling out, you feel like your mood is all over the place, try just adding in breakfast and or at least adding in some fat and protein to your morning drink. And I think that really helps even things out.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree because, it all comes back to, you're on your own journey and figuring out what works for you and it changes. And so, yeah, like I was definitely in that place where I went, chronically fasting and I was doing it all the time and I felt good. And then I hit this kind of plateau and I was like, all right, well, this isn't working anymore and I'm not feeling good anymore. So I need to switch things up and try something new. But it's like, it comes back to that kind of phobia as well. Like when you start, if you're so used to, if you develop this habit of fasting till, noon or 2:00 every single day, and then you start to incorporate, maybe food in the morning, it's like you have to not fear that and try something else. So if something's not, what's that saying? It's like insanity is the definition of doing something over and over again and it's not working.
Yeah. Doing something over and over again when it's not working is the definition of insanity. Whatever. No, but it's true. And I think even, if you've been fasting, this is what I would say. If someone's been fasting for a long time and they are not feeling their best and they need to adjust it, I would not fast for a bit. But I'm a big fan of, kind of switching up whether or not you're fasting every day and doing different things. Like Dr. Pompa talks a lot about this, and I love his protocols where, you might have 3 or 4 days where you're intermittent fasting. You have one feast day, maybe you have one total fast day, and maybe one day where, just regular. And just switching that up in terms of your caloric intake and also whether or not you're fasting can be really helpful. Or maybe some days you're doing a 16-8 and other days you are, you're eating in a 12-hour window, and maybe one day you're eating one meal a day. I think it can be really great to kind of cycle in those different types of fasts. Again, just switching things up for the body, because that's how we are designed to function. And I think problems often arise when people stick to the same thing for too long. So why not just build in switching it up? And that also, I think, allows you to be more flexible in your own life. But again, you can only do that if you're metabolically flexible,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is the point of doing that first, getting to that point where, you don't have to have a plan every day. Maybe you're out and you're busy all day and you don't have time to eat. Oh, that can naturally just be my fasting day or my one meal a day. And maybe you're home the next day and you have time to eat all your meals. So you do. Just switching things up, I think, is really good for the body, but you have to develop that metabolic flexibility first so that that's not a stress on your body. Because I think a lot of people just hop into fasting, and I'm a big believer that you kind of have to earn your right to fast. And if you are fasting and you're feeling starving all the time and you feel like my blood sugar is dysregulated, I'm angry, you're not ready to fast yet. I
Yeah.
think that when you're ready to fast, when you have developed the metabolic machinery to use ketones and fasting feels easy. That's when you're ready to do it. So I think, there are levels and steps to getting there.
Yeah, for sure. I think you should host this show because literally every point that you're hitting on is like exactly what I'm
Yeah.
trying to, educate people on, teach you, especially women. Cause I just, like you said, women are just different than men. Like it's not as easy for us to be keto 24/7. And kind of on that other route, I want to talk a little bit about your carnivore experiments, because there are some like women especially who notice that, and this is what you said, like you notice that you feel much better going straight carnivore than you would maybe like keto for a little bit longer term. So what do you think that is? Like, do you think there's like kind of this shift that happens that with being carnivore, like very, very low carb carnivore is different than like keto, and like how that works with stress? I don't know if does that make sense, that question?
Yeah. And I think it's something that, and we've talked about this off air, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I think a lot of people in the space are still trying to wrap their head around. I talk to people who are experts in carnivore and just diving into this. And I feel like I still can't get a clear answer of what's happened. Is something weird happening with the metabolism? And especially like reading so many anecdotes of people who can double, triple their calories and their body composition like improves or stays the same. There's something weird going on. I don't really know. I don't really know exactly. But I think for me, there are a few things. I think the root problem is always inflammation. It's always inflammation. And for someone like me, with a very sensitive body, I've had many autoimmune diseases. My gut is more sensitive and just can't break down carbohydrates like other people. For me, getting rid of all of the plant foods has, eliminated all of these toxins that were causing inflammation in my body. And that just allows my body to heal at the same time, giving my body so much protein and fat to repair and create healthier cell membranes and hormones. I'm just mega dosing my body with those macronutrients that we need. And I think that's a big portion of it. I think like reducing everything that could potentially cause the inflammation and then just giving your body what it needs to repair. And then it's almost like, okay, my body's just in repair mode now. It doesn't have to deal with anything else causing inflammation. So I think that's a big piece of it. But I think in keto, there are a few problems. If you're somebody who falls into, oh, I'm going to eat too many keto treats, like me, like I ate way too many nuts and seeds and keto
Yeah.
friendly things, that would cause me gut issues. But I think also like I'm just someone who's more sensitive to vegetables, like fiber and leafy greens really wreck my gut. And not everybody's like that. But for somebody like me, that was problematic. I've reached this point now where I feel best being mostly animal based, and around my period especially, I will just add in carbohydrates in the form of berries or sweet potato or some other type of tuber, like for about 3 days before maybe I just listen to my body. If I'm craving it, I know I have it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get my period tomorrow, I think. And I've been having berries the last 2 nights. So I just add that in. And I notice it because I start to feel so hungry despite eating 3 pounds of meat. Right. And so I'm like, oh, I need some carbs. So I just eat some carbs and I feel full again. And then I after a few days, I crave meat and I'm like, oh, I have a carb aversion. And so I just go
Yeah.
back to eating meat. And that's what's worked best for me. So that's why, I mean, I'm not 100% carnivore, but I think I had to go through that healing phase first.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's really interesting. I think also part of why I love it is because I don't have to think about anything. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy. And I only eat twice a day now, which is much easier for me in terms of time than when I was eating more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the more like you experiment and the more you do these things, the more you become like in tune with your body a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give for someone who is like has just listened to everything we just talked about and they're like, oh crap, like I don't know where to start. Like what would you say like to maybe a woman who's listening who is like checking off the list of, wow, I've experienced this and this after like all the things we've talked about. Where do you think they should start in terms of maybe if they're looking to incorporate a diet experiment or something like that?
Well, I think it depends on where the person's, I guess, at currently. So are we assuming they're already eating like a whole foods diet?
Yeah, I would say like someone who's been, for example, like keto for, a
Mm.
long time, and they maybe want to try out carnivore or something like that.
Okay. Well, I think first this is what I would do. So like, let's say you're keto for a long time. I would first start cycling carbohydrates, get that built up. After doing that for a while, I would move back into like stricter keto for a bit. And I would move into carnivore.
Mhm.
Um,
And when you say
and
carbs, you mean like whole food, like
yeah, I mean like
real
sweet
carbs. Yeah.
potatoes, sweet potatoes, kabocha squash, which Rachel and I are addicted to,
Yeah.
delicata, butternut squash, the good ones.
Hmm.
Yeah, I always eat paleo. Always. I'm a
Yeah.
big believer in a whole foods diet. So I would go that route and I would, I think easing into it is the best for your body, easiest on your body, and also giving your body enough time to adapt. I mean, carnivore adaptation for me was rough because I had a lot of toxins that needed to die off. Other people, it's easier, but your body needs at least 1 to 2 weeks, if not 3, to really kind of adapt to the new diet and also your digestive system. A lot of people will try a new way of eating and they're like, my digestion is all messed up and it's been 3 to 4 days and they want to give up.
Yeah.
Just, you got to push through because there's always that uncomfortable stage. But I think it's really good to experiment with your body, but give yourself enough time on each diet, spend 2 to 3 months doing one thing and then slowly move back. But I would say go from keto to carb cycling or even having carbs, some whole food carbohydrates every day, then move back into a ketogenic approach and then move into carnivore, so you're experiencing all sides of the spectrum. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I like what you said about like giving it time, because that's another thing that, with a lot of clients I work with, it's like maybe they try something for like you said, like 3 days and they don't see any benefits. And they're like, well, I'm not seeing anything different. So I'm just going to go back to what I was doing or try something different. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the big issues too. It's like we have to get away from this like instant gratification and realize that things take time. Like everything substantial is going to take time
Yeah.
to, see the benefits or not see the benefits. So I think, yeah, giving it a little bit of time is definitely like super important.
Yeah, and like I'll just share a little bit about my personal experience with that. When I first started adding in more carbohydrates, I was so bloated and was not pooping for the first 2 weeks. And then it evened out and I was
Yeah.
back to normal. So I just need to give my body that time. When I went from keto to carnivore, I had a really rough adaptation. When I first tried carnivore last year, it only lasted 2 weeks. I thought, I'm out. This is not working for me. I feel awful. And then I tried this year again and I pushed through. For me, it took about 40 days, I feel like, to really adapt. But I also, have such a crazy history. Most people it doesn't take that long, but I would say if you have autoimmune diseases, history of different gut infections, it might take you longer to adapt. So, but had I not pushed through like that 45 days, I wouldn't have felt the benefits. I didn't really totally feel the benefits until I got through that adaptation phase. So just be patient. If things are changing, then that's a good sign. Sometimes it's uncomfortable at first, but it might be good in the long run. So give it at least 2 weeks, I would say.
No, I like that. And that's like, I actually tried carnivore it was probably a year ago now for 30 days. And I definitely saw some improvements in digestion and, lack of bloating and things like that. But for me, I didn't really have any like underlying, like really bad issues. So it was just kind of doing it to just do it and try it out. But like for me, I just love vegetables and I'm like such a volume eater. And I did it for 30 days and I was just like, yeah, like this is like, I'm noticing some benefits, but it's not as much as like, it's not enough for me to like stick with this long term. So I kind of see carnivore as like, for me personally, I'll do it as kind of like a reset or, just if I am noticing some like digestive issues going on or things like that, like I'll try it out and do it for a little bit. And then kind of just go back to the veggies just because I love vegetables. But I think it's just comes back to everybody being different. And, one thing that works for someone is not going to work for, another person. And you just got to find what works for you. So
yeah, it's a healing diet. And I think people need to remember that. And, if you want to be carnivore forever, that's great. If you don't, then you don't have to either. I think people forget about the social aspect of food and eating and just like enjoying your life. And not everybody's sensitive to vegetables. So if you're not, and you like them, why not include them? Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't eat this way unless I noticed a significant difference. And I think for me, I started this mold Lyme protocol last year and they said, this is going to be at least 1.5 to 2 years, if not longer. And within, I radically changed my diet. I did carnivore and, I added in some supplements and things, but within 3 months, I moved. Within 3 months, I feel like I'm a normal person again. It's been like 3 or 4 months. And that's pretty insane. And, hearing people like Craig Emmerich, who has put his Lyme into remission as well with carnivore, I think it's a really powerful healing modality that a lot of people don't know kind of how to wrap their heads around. And I agree. But if it's working for people and there are people out there who are really suffering, why not try it? We don't know. And I also am someone who pays honestly more attention to anecdotal experience and someone's personal experience than I do the science, because I think there's a lot that science hasn't understood. There are a lot of studies that need to be done that haven't been and aren't going to be done because who's going to fund them? And I think it takes too long for science to get out there if the right science is even done. And I mean, you could pick apart almost any study and you can find a study proving both sides of every argument, proving, and we have to listen to our bodies, and if something is really working for you and it doesn't make any sense, but if you're feeling good, then okay, like let's work with that. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of power in experimenting for yourself and listening to your own body rather than what the media is saying, and being metabolically flexible, because you also don't have to pick just one diet. And I think people really feel that way. They're like, should I be vegan or keto or high carb, high protein, low protein? And I'm like, whoa, slow your roll. What if you could be all of them at different times? What if you could just like listen to what your body's needing, go in cycles, change things seasonally? You don't have to just pick one thing and release that pressure. Just figure out what's working for you right now and then be open to the fact that your body might change and then adjust from there. And you can have everything. You can have it all. Have it all.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think we should end on that note because that was absolutely amazing information, and definitely think, someone should go back and listen to that again because it was very like, you got to find what works for you, and doesn't have to be one thing, I think we can all agree though that like focusing on whole foods is the most important thing, and then going off from there, find your path from there.
I would agree. I used to say we can all agree that plants are good, but I no longer can say that. We can all agree that whole unprocessed foods are the way to go, but Plants are up for debate.
Yep. If it had a face at one point, or if it grew from the earth at one point, that is that should be your foundation. That's what I think. But then also being realistic and incorporating other things here and there. Like for me, like 80 to 90% every single day is whole foods. And then if I want to have some protein ice cream with my protein powder that I know is processed and goes through processing, whatever, I'll do that, because that's what I enjoy, and that's my reality. And I obviously try to choose obviously like the protein powders that are, the ones that are organic and higher quality, of course. But it comes back to also having to be realistic about this, and like we're living our lives, and like food is something that brings people together. It's not, food. There's some people who look at food as just like, oh, it's just here to fuel us, right? And so it doesn't matter what it tastes like or what it makes us feel like. Like there's some people who say that, and I'm like the total opposite, because it's like, okay, well, I love food. Like I've always loved food, but I need to find like a balance for me that works so that I can be realistic about my life and enjoy it and be able to go out to eat and have, if I want to have a scoop of ice cream now and then, like my body can do that because I've taught my body to be metabolically flexible. And I just continue to do that. And so I think that's super important. Like we have to, like for me, for what I believe, it's like the end goal should be just working on becoming as metabolically flexible as possible. And then you can just thrive from there. So
I totally agree. I think it's what you're doing most of the time, and we have to take like the social aspect and just happiness into account, because look, the mind is powerful. The mind itself, our stress levels, that can affect our overall health. And if you are stressed all the time about the way you're eating and you feel like you can't live your life, that's no way to live. And that's going to make you sick and unhealthy and gain weight. That is not good either. So there's just finding that balance and eating those unprocessed foods most of the time, and then throw in what you want outside of that, to your tolerance level. Everyone has a different tolerance level. So maybe someone like me needs to have less things off my carnivore diet less often, off plan, than someone else who doesn't have any underlying issues or a history of autoimmune disease or gut issues. It's like between the two of us, for example, like your body is more resilient than mine right now. So it's just about meeting yourself where you're at. And I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people who just see food as just as fuel, but it's so much more than that. And yeah, it's ideal to somewhat emulate our ancestors. We need to go back to that, but also we are not our ancestors. Like we live in a modern day with technology and access to any foods we want at any time. So it's just about finding that middle ground and really enjoying our life too, right? Because if you are just like dreading eating, that is no way to live. Food is social, food is cultural. But yeah, I think we're on the same page here.
Agreed. Okay, so I always end with like a random question, just for fun. So if you had one superpower, what would it be?
This is really hard, but I think it would be the ability to just immediately memorize and know, like if I had a book, can I touch the book and immediately I had memorized and learned all the information in that book?
Oh,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would probably be on my top list too.
Yeah, like you could have so much knowledge, like you don't have to spend the time studying or learning. You can just immediately, or if I'm like reading a big article on the internet, can I just like tap my finger and all of a sudden I have absorbed all of that knowledge? That's what I would want.
We're such nerds.
I know.
I'm like, I didn't even think about that, but I'm like, yeah, I'd love to have that superpower.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So do you have anything like cool coming up in the near future? Anything you're excited about?
Yeah, I have a lot of very exciting things coming out. So I'm kind of like changing my business a bit, and my new website will be launching soon. And I'm going to have like a bunch of courses in my membership portion of my website. So my website has like a monthly membership, and people have access to all of my exclusive blog posts that have a ton of information I used to just save for my clients, recipes, workouts, and then all these different courses covering different health topics, because I'm no longer seeing one-on-one nutrition clients. So I'm really excited for that. And then like just this business coaching, I've launched the beta round for my business coaching program for other nutritionists, health coaches, trainers, and I've started that and I'm really excited. So the official version will be launching in a few months. So if anyone's listening who's a coach who wants to expand their business, definitely reach out to me. But yeah, and podcast still rolling. Wellness Realness. Rachel's been on the show, so you should definitely check out the show.
Yeah. Tell us where else we can find you. So Wellness Realness podcast. What's your website? And,
my website is ChristinaRiceWellness.com, and then my Instagram is Christina Rice Wellness. Very active on Instagram, so come say hi to me over there.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like, when you look at your Instagram, it's like the top stories. You're always there because I'm always watching your stories because it's so fun and entertaining.
Oh, thank you. Hey, that's part of my technique. That's a sales technique. You need to be omnipresent. You need to be at the top of the stories list, Yeah,
I might need to get in on your biz program.
Oh yeah, we can do some magic. Yeah, lots of exciting things coming up, and I'm so excited that you're releasing this podcast. I know it's been a lot of work in the making, and you have some amazing guests. So I'm just super pumped for you to get this education out there for people, and Netflix and chill.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your time, and I'll definitely have to have you on again because we could just talk about everything for sure.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.